Hello and welcome to another episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. Today I shall be attempting to do a mini makeover on this Matchbox number 25b, a Volkswagen 1200 sedan. They came out in 1960. The wheels were either black, silver or various shades of grey. A good one will sell for over $100, but if you've got one with black plastic wheels and it's in mint condition, it could fetch upwards of $1,000. When I first started this, I wanted one of each of the original 1 to 75 Matchbox Leslie models. I've gone off trend a couple of times and done other larger models and even a couple of other brands. However, today I thought I would continue on my original course and do up another one of these original models, as this one I do not have in my collection. This model has been painted by a previous owner in orange paint. Now he either ran out of paint or the orange paint's been scuffed off over time, but you can see it's meant to be this silver blue. The underneath is held on with one rivet. This one has grey metal wheels, which I thought was unusual. And here's that little quirky thing I was talking about. It's a rear mounted engine on these Volkswagen Beetles, and this one has one on display when you open the boot, which in this case would be a bonnet or a hood. So as before, I'm going to take out this rivet on the front, pull it apart, paint strip it, undercoat it, repaint it, put it back together, and hopefully it will look near new. Let's see how I go. I just take off the bare minimum amount of metal there so that there's a force fit when I put it back together, hopefully. Today I'm doing something slightly different. I'm going to drill out the hole where I'm going to put the screw to refit the base when it goes back together. So I'm using that 1.3mm drill to drill the hole, and this is a little M2 button-headed hex screw that I shall be putting in. And you can see that according to my mini micrometer there, the width of the threaded portion of that M2 screw is 1.7. The tap overall is 1.8, so perfect match. I've got this tiny little chuck. It's an additional chuck that goes into a larger chuck to enable me to hold these very thin, skinny needle type drills. Quite often I used to wrap paper masking tape around the shank of the drill so that my drill could grip it as the jaws are getting a little bit worn. Somebody kindly sent me this miniature chuck, and if you haven't got one, I recommend you get one. I don't know how I managed before I got it. It's so much easier now. Now as I drilled through there, I felt the drill drop into a recess and I thought I'd gone all the way through. I think it turns out there might have been like an air pocket in the casting, and basically I drilled through it into a void. So that was lucky. If that had happened and I was on a slight angle, I could possibly have broken the drill bit. Not much more to do now. I'm going to take out the windscreen. Oops, look at that. I was wondering how that was attached. That's the boot section there that covers the engine. It's got two little hinge pins on it. Oh, and they sit in those grooves there at the back. I've got to remove this rivet to pop out the windscreen so I can give it a clean. Otherwise, of course, I'd have to mask it off, which would be a bit of a pain. I'm using this shallow cut drill that I modified, and it helps to reduce the risk of puncturing through the roof of the model when you're removing this internal rivet that holds these screens on. This is a very common technique that Matchbox use, and most vehicles have to have the windscreen removed if fitted to do a proper clean paint strip and repaint. So once again I just removed the minimum amount of metal and actually used a fair bit of force there to pry that out. So hopefully it will snap back in nicely. Now I'm using this hand chuck to cut a thread in that hole I drilled before. It's very simple to do. Some people lubricate it. I used to lubricate it. I have since found that that's not 100% necessary. It's not best practice in the industry, of course, of metal work. But for these little models, it's a little bit of overkill. And it's just an extra little thing that I don't do anymore. But I used to. after I've cut the thread, I always put the little button screws straight in to prevent the hole from being clogged with paint when I undercoat and paint the model. Not only that, I like the screws to be colour matched to the body, as this is what the original rivet would look like, because they were all part of the same assembly. Because the rivet and the body are all one and the same thing. These grey metal wheels, which I think are somewhat unusual, I can only see reference to grey or black plastic wheels, so I don't know whether this is something unusual or whether there's a lot of these around. Anyway, the wheels are quite tight on the axle and I had to force that down there to expose the end of the axle. Even though I did do that, this is still very difficult to get in there without damaging the wheel. Very tight to pull off. I've got sore fingers here. And I actually tried again to try and take a little bit more of that off. Very, very careful not to damage the wheel. I do have spares, but I don't want to use them if I don't have to. So I managed to get that one off. And I decided for the rear one, as the axle was slightly bit shorter, that I had no option but to break open a new cylindrical grindstone that has a nice sharp right angle on the corner. Here's a comparison of the one I've been using. It's worn a shoulder on it. But the brand new one with the right angled edge, nice sharp cutting edge there, makes it a lot easier to be accurate with it and reduces the risk of damaging the wheel. I'll be dressing up that other one with the curved shoulder later and reusing it. The paint on this model I could not find off the shelf, so I thought I'd try some of these SMS, the Scale Modelers supply paints that Scale Modelers sent to me. Very kind of you, thank you SMS. I've used them in a few of the makeovers so far, and I've tried to blend this metallic blue and the silver together to make up a colour as close as I can to the original. So I put some on the top of the cars for comparison reasons. Here's a nice slow-mo shot of that happening. Just playing around with my Samsung S10 there. Right, I think that's as close as I'm going to get, as I haven't actually done many metallic paint schemes and I'm still sort of experimenting with it. So I'm going to leave it like that and hopefully it should look good. Going to strip off the old paint now with some paint stripper. And this paint came off very easily indeed. It was quite a pleasure to strip this thing. It's like literally a 5-minute job. Just dunked some of that on there. Let it soften the paint. Go and make a cup of tea, come back. And it virtually fell off. I'm happy with that. This part is so satisfying when you get to this stage and you know you're going to remove the paint and expose the raw metal underneath. The first time in 50 years it's been seen. The orange paint put up a little bit of a fight, but resistance is futile, as I will never give up. And the base paint always seems to come off really easily. Must be a different product paint they use for the bases. So I just clean off all the remaining residue and chips of paint that are clinging on, held in place by the paint stripper, because it's a gel type paint stripper. And look at that, it's just that tiny little bit of orange left in the corner there. I'll hook that out with this denture brush. Clean them up in some soap solution, let them dry. Now I'm just going to give them a quick dust over coating of the fine surface primer, and then I'll get into painting them. If you haven't tried this hobby, I would recommend you get into it. If you're the same age as me, I was born in 1962. It's just a great slow-paced hobby where you can go at your own pace. You can forget about your worries. You can lock yourself away in a shed or a back room. Or I used to, when I first started, I used to lock myself away in the kitchen of a night. And it's just a great little bit of solitude. I think everyone needs a little bit of solitude every now and again. Not too much, obviously you need social contact if you can get it. But it's great just to put everything to one side and concentrate on the finer details in life. Like this insignificant little model. As always, I'm going to show you a little close-up of some of the details on these parts. I'm not too sure if that's a handle or a light assembly or a combination of both. It looks a bit iffy, doesn't it, up close? But to the naked eye, of course, these were wonderful little jewels in the toy shops of my youth, and I could never get enough of them. This one's got an unusual base in that the rear-mounted engine is cast as one with the base. A lot of detail there, flywheel and carburetor, air intake, I think. On the side, this is a two-door vehicle. There's only two door handles, and there's a vent there for, I guess, drawing cooling air into the air-cooled engine compartment. Some tail lights, little details on the bumper bar. And it's only at this stage now I notice there's a big lump there, which has really annoyed me tremendously. And I thought this model was going to be really easy. And this was the start of my problems. So obviously I can't display it at the end with a big lump on the bonnet there like that. So I got a small file, one of the smallest ones that I own. And I just started very gently filing it away and trying to take it down level with the rest of the bonnet. It was then that I realised that, remember when I drilled the post out, I felt the drill fall into a void? Well, I think that this is another one of those voids. This metal, for whatever reason, maybe atmospheric or different blend of alloys, actually had a little air bubble in it, and it manifested itself as a lump on the bonnet. So now, having ground down the lump, I'm left with a hollow that was underneath the lump. It's taking me a lot of time now just to sort of address this tiny little issue with some body filler and a toothpick. And I know for a fact, because in the past, you never get it right first time. And that took several applications and several sanding sessions to get rid of that void and make it look neat. The base I spray with a satin black paint. It looks a bit ordinary when it's wet, but when it dries absolutely perfect. It's a cheap $2 can from the $2 shop, and one can lasts about 6 months. So here's a few shots of that process of me eliminating the lump and then eliminating the hole. Anyway, moving on, the windscreen had little scraps of orange paint on it, a slight bit of damage there and a minor crack, which I'm not too bothered about. However, it was scuffed up a little bit. So I'm using this semi-chrome metal polish. It's just a very small amount and some cotton buds. And I'm doing a test first on the top because I did it once. When I did the Priscilla Queen of the Desert bus, I went straight into doing the windscreen and it went all opaque. So I learnt my lesson from that, and now I always do the roof of the windscreen as a test before I go on to the bit that's going to be seen. This orange paint really clung onto this plastic, but I got it all off eventually. Listen to that squeak. I like that. It signals to me that the polishing process has finished. And normally I dunk this in some clear floor polish. I didn't think it was warranted today because the finish on this looked, to my eye, to a point where it wouldn't be improved upon by dunking it in some polish. So I thought I'd just leave that for this one. All original. Now this SMS paint, it says on there 15 to 20 psi. Well, I often use double that, so I've had to recalibrate my little compressor here. You see, I think it goes up to like 40 psi, and then I have to back it off. And some people sent me some messages and said, I've never heard of anyone spraying paint at that pressure, but I knew no different, and I've been doing it my entire life so far, the last 2.5 years that I've been doing this hobby. I've always just done it at like between 30 and 40 psi, and I've had no issues. But because this actually has a label on the bottle that says 15 to 20, I'm backing it off a bit, because I don't need to thin this, by the way. The SMS paint comes pre-thinned, so you just tip it straight into the airbrush and away you go. As you can see here, the front of the bonnet came up real good after the undercoat. Because this is a blend of two coloured paints there, the silver and the blue, I thought I'd give it an extra whisk just to try and get it as even as possible. Didn't want one colour coming out more than the other. As it was, they blended together quite nicely. But the grey under primer did seem to, I guess you could see it through the paint, because the paint must be only like a micron thick or something. So I had to give it quite a few coats. One thing I did notice is this paint goes really quick. Like, I only did this tiny little model, gave it a couple of coats, and when I looked in the pot, I was gobsmacked because the paint had vanished. So because it's so thin, it must come out really fast, and I probably wasted more than actually that hit the bonnet. Look at that, that's all that stuff I made up. I thought I'd made up twice as much as I needed, but I had to actually go ahead and make up some more. Now, not only did he give me some paints, he gave me some of this high gloss finish as well. So the first time I've used it, I think. So I thought, why not? In for a penny, in for a pound. So I gave the model a coat of that super clear coat, and it looks gorgeous. I'm thinking I'm on to a winner here. Anyway, what I forgot to mention is that I'm now working at night. Everyone's asleep, and I've got the window open for ventilation. And all these bugs got in. You can see them all under the umbrella there, skirting around. Not just the moth, but all the other little ones. So I went out to my shed and I bought in this little blue lamp. And I thought, somehow I've got to sterilise this area, because these little things are going to be landing on all the freshly painted bits. And the next day I started afresh. Not much to do now, using this little dull silver paint marker. I repainted the rear mounted engine details. These paint pens, the Pentel ones, the finish you get looks very much like the pot metal finish rather than the high chrome finish. And to the naked eye you wouldn't know it was painted. It just looks like it's raw metal. These tyres, I noticed some of them were chipped and some of them had some orange paint on. So I thought, a quick fix. I've done this once before. This is a pre-mixed little pot of wheel paint that I've made, and it's the exact same colour as the originals, and it's a great little wash. I've got a black one for the black tyres. Well, this is a grey one for the grey tyres. Tyres or wheels? I guess you could call them wheels. Anyway, I do that, and I give them a coat of some matte, Tamiya matte varnish, flat clear TS80, and it just knocks down all the surface and makes them look like they're powder coated type look of the originals. Whilst I was doing this, I did wonder, how did Matchbox paint these so perfectly? Must have had them strung on a bit of wire or something. So once those are dry, straight out to my shed with the drill press and the nail punch method. Just, that didn't quite do it there, go again. Sometimes this can take a hell of a long time, but sometimes it's almost instantaneous. There we go, that's good enough. Actually, I think I'll go one more on that one. Then I do the back one. Now back in the hobby room, time to put this little sucker back together. Not too many bits and pieces here. Already though, I'm into my third day, can you believe it? It's just crazy, this start, the little things in life, I tell you what. You need a bit of patience for this. There's my tip of the day. Don't go into it lightly. If somebody told me that once when I did a bit of paving. Crazy paving, they said, don't go into it lightly because it's a hell of a job. You think on the face of it it's easy, but it's not. Same here. I know there's a lot of us do it, but it can be extremely frustrating at times. Sometimes you feel like you're just going to have to walk away and come back another day and resume with a fresh mind. Which is all part of the sort of pleasure you get from this, I guess. You can, it's all a mind game. Something else to think about. So I used a little blob of silicone there to hold that glass back in, the plastic. This took me forever and a day to get that little boot lid in there without it going in cockeyed when I put the base on. I must have done it 6 times before I got it right. Every time I got to this stage, I flipped it over, looked at the back, and the thing was on an angle. Anyway, I love those colour match screws in the bottom. It's kind of, I guess, one of the things I do. Anyway, time to recap and have a look at this tiny little insignificant model of a Volkswagen Beetle, which I think was one of the most popular vehicles ever made in Europe, wasn't it? And this is what it looks like now. Now, it is what it is. It's a 50-year-old casting. It's a 50-year-old piece of plastic in there. And it's got 50-year-old wheels. So you can only do as best you can. And this is what I try to do in every restoration I do. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Now, as my mother used to say, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Well, this is one such example. Overall, it's a boring model and not one of Matchbox's most famous or revolutionary, if you will. However, at the end of the day, it's a tiny little model, it's one I haven't got, and it's going to look great in my display cabinet, along with all the others. Here's a close-up of that real tailgate with the motor in there. That's one good thing about this model, and I do like it as a special feature. So there we go, another one to add to the mix, only another 642 to go. I just made that figure up, but sometimes it feels like that. 2 days ago, on the 25th of April here in Australia, we celebrated Anzac Day. What is that, you ask? Anzac stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. It is a public holiday and it marks the anniversary of the first major military action fought by Australian and New Zealand forces during the First World War in 1915. This military action was to capture the Turkish Gallipoli Peninsula and then push on to Constantinople. 8 months after landing, virtually no progress had been made, but over 8,000 Australian soldiers had lost their lives. Kevin tells me that his great-grandfather Rupert took part in the First World War. Kevin showed me a picture that he found in an old shoebox of photos. It's of Kevin's great-grandfather, pictured in his light horse uniform and proudly showing, apparently, the contents of a recently received Red Cross parcel. Here's to all those brave men who fell at Gallipoli, lest we forget. Thanks for watching. This is Marty from Marty's Matchbox Makeovers saying goodbye.